Good afternoon. We'll bring the 4 o'clock City Council special meeting to order. All council members are present and accounted for. The Pledge of Allegiance, if Mayor Pro Tem Greg Newton can lead.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're going to move on to discussion action items, but A and B I'm going to turn over to Andy. He's going to talk about that just briefly.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, this is a study session. I do want to emphasize that. The items on the agenda for this special meeting, the City Council will not be asked to make any, take any action pertaining to all of these three items. Again, these are just discussion items just to present information to the City Council. I do want to note that items number A and B will be presented as one item. And with that, I am going to turn it over to the Finance Officer to introduce items number A and B.
Good afternoon. I'd like to introduce John Bartel for this presentation. He'll be presenting both items. John has over 40 years of experience in employee benefits. John focuses on pension consulting for a wide variety of public and private sector clients. He founded Bartel Associates to serve public sector agencies, emphasizing quality, personal attention, and clear results at reasonable fees. Clients rely on John's ability to apply complex regulations in understandable ways. He's the leading individual in the state of California, and we're very lucky to have him present the status of our retiree healthcare plan ending June 30th, 2015, and the CalPERS pension plan ending June 30th, 2015, all regarding the GASB actuarial focus. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do my best to always say this whenever I'm talking to council, honorable mayor, members of the council. It's absolutely my honor to be here talking with you all about this. I'll, at the risk of getting myself in very serious trouble, I'd like to, if I may, set a ground rule. And my ground rule is, please, as we go through this, interrupt and ask questions as we go. This is your meeting, not mine, so I want to absolutely make sure that you all don't walk away with questions. So please interrupt. Let's kind of go from there. We're really talking about two topics. The first topic is the retiree healthcare plan. This is a benefit for employees after they retire. We completed the June 30, 15 the Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement number 45, actuarial valuation. So we're giving you the exciting highlights relative to that. And then the city also participates in the CalPERS pension plan. And so we have Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement number 68 results. So that will be in the city's June 30, 16 financial statement. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the agenda. Most of the agenda items are related to the retiree healthcare benefits, but we'll take a little bit of time, talk about the benefits, talk about your demographics, what do you all look like. We'll talk a little bit about what is the accounting standard, what does it say, why does it say what it does. We'll then talk about what I happen to think is one of the more important items, and that is years ago, very, very few agencies pre-funded retiree healthcare benefits. The city early on in the process set up what I refer to as a funding or contribution policy a bit ahead of what many other agencies did. So we'll talk a little bit about that policy, and then we'll talk about where you all are relative to that policy We'll talk about how much money you folks have, the city has set aside to take care of these obligations. And then we'll go into my favorite part, which is the valuation results. And then the new, there is a relatively new OPEB accounting standard, retiree healthcare accounting standard coming down the road. We'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about the pension, CalPERS pension results. So a lot of information on this very first slide. Let me kind of point out a couple of things. The benefit, the retiree healthcare benefit, is for folks who retire directly from the city and begin to receive their pension benefit. So to be eligible for the retiree healthcare benefit, you have to begin to receive your pension benefit. So the city, back in 2004, changed the benefit. So the benefit prior to 2004 was 100% of the full premium up to $1,250 a month. And in 2004, current employees were offered the chance to opt into what I kind of think of as a vesting schedule associated with the benefit, and all employees hired on or after September 1 of 2004 were automatically in the new benefit. The new benefit is defined by a section in the CalPERS code, or the what I refer to as the PEMCA, or the medical component of the code. And that section says that you are required to be eligible for a benefit, required to work for the city for 5 years, but you need 20 years of CalPERS service to get 100% of the benefit. The only exception to that is if you disability retire. The amounts are substantially less than the $1,250 benefit. It averages about $400 a month towards premium, about $800 if you have a two-party, and about $1,000 if you have family coverage. If you retire and elect a survivor benefit, the benefits automatically continue to your survivor. If you elect a single life annuity, benefits do not continue to the survivor. Slide 2. You all contracted out for fire and police services. You have, so you really have no active safety employees, but you have 54 eligible, if they retire directly from the city, to receive the retiree medical benefit. The vast majority of those, 42 of the 54, are eligible for the vesting benefit, 12 eligible for the old $1,250 benefit. Your active employees are, by my standards, young. By most agency standards, approaching retirement. Average age of 48. Average city service about 9 years. CalPERS service about 10 years. We also show, even though the benefit is not related to salary, what we try to do is to look at the obligation relative to salary, and so that's why we show average salary and total salary. Average about $48,000, total about $2.6 million. You have, what drives your liability to a very large degree are your retirees. You have a large number of retirees compared to actives, 66 non-safety, 17 safety, 83 in total compared to 54 actives. So when we look at the numbers relative to payroll, they end up looking relatively large. To a very large degree, they're large because you have a fair number of retirees, and also a fair number of those existing retirees are safety retirees. Average age of your retirees, right about 67. The average age at which they retired for miscellaneous, right at 58. Miscellaneous service retirements. For safety, 57. Those are, for an actuary, somebody who looks at data a lot, those are always interesting to me. The miscellaneous retirement, a little bit younger than we might have expected. The safety retirement, the exact opposite, a little bit later. Now disability retirement, very, very similar to other agencies around the state. So, Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement Number 4 deals with, as we've said before, retiree health care, but in the title is something referred to as OPEB. OPEB is other than pension, post-employment benefits. The single biggest component there is the retiree health care benefit. So historically, before the accounting standard came in, what almost every agency in the state would do is they would wait to think about these benefits until somebody retired. Somebody retires, you owe that person $1, you account for it when you pay for it. So no accounting for the obligation, if you will, sort of the OPEB equivalent of having a kid, waiting until that kid graduates from high school to think about the cost of college. So certainly the accounting standard allowed for it. In hindsight, probably not the best for planning purposes. Well, along comes Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement Number 45, issued in June of 2004. The city implemented it in 2008 and 9, and the new accounting standard says you need to look at what you should be contributing, what you should be doing to fund the plan, and you will accrue a liability on your books equal to the difference between what you should be contributing and what you actually do contribute. So that becomes particularly important for the city, particularly in the very first year of implementation. I'll explain why in a minute. What the city did was set up a trust with CalPERS to set that money aside. That money is irrevocable. Irrevocable means you can only use it to pay the benefits. You can't use it for any other purpose. So the city years ago set up a funding policy. It is currently funded in what we refer to as Fund 1. That is the most aggressive investment mix. In 2008-9, the city's policy was in year 1, you all had set some money aside, so contribute the benefits due retirees in that year, plus $1.9 million, and then on an ongoing basis for the next 5 years, phase into funding by contributing PAYGO plus 50% of the difference between ARC and PAYGO, and then over the next 5 years, go to 75% with a target of being at 100% of the ARC in 1920. When I say 1920, sorry, 2019-20 fiscal year. So what's fascinating about that is when you look at the excess of the funding policy over PAYGO, that's the column that we've shown there as expected. So very first year, expected 1.9, city contributed 1.9 million. And then if you go down that, what you see are a couple of very notable things. Notable thing number one is the amounts that are in excess of pay-go, in other words, the amount that you should be contributing, are decreasing. I'll explain why in a moment. But what's also fascinating is the amounts you all have been contributing, with a couple of exceptions, have really generally been more than the plan expected. So a couple of years, 9-10 fiscal year, and then 11-12, a little notable. All of the other years are very close to or in excess of what you needed to contribute. So if you can tolerate a little editorial comment here, we certainly have some clients who are not pre-funding. We have some clients who are aggressively pre-funding. You all are doing a great job of setting a plan, setting a policy, sticking with it, and really exceeding it. So I really look at this as absolutely what I wish many of my clients were doing. Set a realistic goal and then be a little aggressive at meeting that goal. And really, if you look at 14, 15, and 15, 16 fiscal years, the contribution requirement sitting at about 160 and 130,000 in each of those years. You've contributed for those 2 years more than that, and we understand that you really have in your budget a continuation of making those contributions. So what that will do is begin to pay your unfunded liability off sooner, which I am my personal bias is I am a fan of doing that. But by the way, I'm a fan of several things. I'm a fan of looking at the order of magnitude of your numbers and having the benefit set at a reasonable level. I think there's a strong argument you all did that back in 2004. And then I'm also a fan of setting money aside to take care of those benefits. Again, kind of a crummy analogy, but if you have a kid going to college today, very, very few people can wait to think about the cost of that until the kid is in school. So here you're setting money aside to pay for those benefits down the road. Now, what you have, if you just kind of look at the right-hand column here, we show how much money you have set aside. We indicate projected. We're sitting here after June 30, 16, when we prepared the report. We had your asset information for the first 3 months of the fiscal year. We did not have it first 3 quarters of the fiscal year. We did not have it for the last quarter, so we projected that last quarter. The actual investment earnings were probably very, very similar to what we projected. So we were projecting a market value of assets of $6.8 million. So you all have $6.8 million set aside to take care of your obligations. And then before we start talking about how well funded you are, what your what your obligation is and how much you've set aside, I just wanted to point out for your reading pleasure some terminology. Let me mention a couple of terms here that are particularly important. We have a term called actuarial accrued liability. Think of that as how much should you have set aside? What is the liability for services that have already been rendered? So that's really what that actuarial accrued liability is. And normal cost, if the actuarial liability is the value of benefits due to services that have been rendered, the normal cost is the value of benefits for services being rendered this year. So I think of that number as a taxpayer generationally equitable number. It's the value of benefits being earned by people who are rendering services to the taxpayer this year. So that's those I think are the two key terms. What I'd like you to do is look at slide 8. Again, let's kind of look at the right-hand column. I'd like you to look at the second square bullet, that actuarial accrued liability. For me, you see some very, very important things here. The value of the benefits for active employees, $4 million. The value of the benefit for those deferred firefighters, $1.6 million. The value of the benefit for people who have already retired, $12.6 million. So if you think of your liability as sort of a legacy benefit, because of the number of folks you have, because your old benefit was relatively generous, you have a large liability, certainly for people who have already retired compared to your active employees. So $18.3 million in total. $6 million at June 30, 15 that you set aside, so an unfunded liability of $12.3 million. So what happens is when I talk particularly to councils and they look at this and they go, oh my goodness, we're only 33% funded. What you will hear me say is for the period that you've been doing this, you are really 33 may not seem quite large, but it's actually very, very good. So up from 28% in the prior valuation. So would it be great if you were 50 or 75 or 100% funded? No doubt. But you're making great progress. I would encourage you to keep doing this so the news can continue to be good. There is in the accounting standard a term. The term is the annual required contribution. Just to be clear, it ain't required. It is, I think of it as how much should you be contributing. And if you look for a moment at the June 30, 15 valuation, your normal cost, that's the value of benefits for current active employees, $342,000. Your payment, we refer to it as UAAL amortization. UAAL is the unfunded actuarial accrued liability. It's the plan to pay that off. That's $800,000 for a total contribution, total ARC of $1,164,000. Of that $1,164,000, $1 million is benefit payments for current retirees. And so if that 164 was on the table that we referred to later, we certainly don't know yet what your actual contribution is going to be for 16-17. We understand in the budget for 16-17 and for 17-18 is $400,000. That again will gradually eat into that unfunded liability if you keep that up. New accounting standard coming down the road, approved by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board last June of last year, replaces Statement 45, and it's effective for the city's 17-18 fiscal year. The big deal is the current obligation links what you should be contributing and what you actually do contribute. That's what determines the liability on your financial statement. The new accounting standard, no more paying attention, and in fact GASB has pulled out the ARC out of the accounting standard, and it is all about what your unfunded liability is. And so what will go on your financial statement will be the what's referred to as your net OPEB liability. That will be the unfunded liability. So if we go back for a moment to slide 8, if you were adopting this standard for the June 30, 16 fiscal year, we would expect you would put on your financial statement your unfunded liability at the beginning of the year. So you would have a net OPEB liability of $12.3 million on your financial statement. As you continue to contribute larger, more amounts greater than the suggested contribution you will wear into that, it is really important when you think about this that that's a liability that goes onto your financial statement. Does not mean you need to have the cash to pay that right away. You clearly need to have money to make your benefit payments. You have done that many times over, and it is really important to have a plan to pay that unfunded liability off. We think you are moving in absolutely that direction. So even though that will be a relatively big number, I would encourage you to continue to think about taking staff recommendation for making those higher than required contributions. So that's the end of the retiree healthcare portion of the presentation. And when we go to yeah.
I just had a question.
Oh, sure.
Why did they shift from to the new Gatsby?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of reasons. If you think about the old standard, this is a crummy analogy, and I'm going to apologize for using it, but pretend for a moment you're looking at my financial statement. If on my financial statement all you knew was whether or not I had made my mortgage payments, that might not really give you a great picture of how much my unfunded liability is. So that's really, I think if you had the accountants in here, if you had the members of the board, they would phrase it much more eloquently than I can. But that's absolutely the way that I think about it. If somebody's looking at my financial statement, I think they want to know, have I made my mortgage payments? But they also want to know how big is my mortgage? What is coming up? And so that, I think, was the motivation. What happened was they made the change on pension standards first, and so the retiree healthcare standards are just kind of following in behind the pension standards. So, but what's kind of fascinating to me is when I first read the draft of the new OPEB standard and the new pension standard, I'm not a young guy and I don't like changes. I read it and I got kind of irritated that they were making the change because clients had just gotten their head around the old standard. And so the more I started thinking about it, the more I really began to realize that's really, in lots of ways, what you want to tell your constituents. What's the order of magnitude of our unfunded liability? There's information in the footnote about whether or not you're making the contribution. Are you paying that unfunded? So all of that is really important, but the accounting standard really gets to that. What do you owe, if you will? And so that's exactly what the pension standard is. So the new pension standard, Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement 68, issued in June of 2012, replaced an old standard that was very, very similar to GASB 45, effective for the city's 14-15 fiscal year. Again, delinks contributions and accounting. The old standard based the net pension obligation on were you making your pension contributions? Did you make them as requested? Now the unfunded liability on the financial statement. information provided from CalPERS, June 30, 15, your total pension liability for the city measured at the beginning of the fiscal year, June 30, 14, 54.4 million. If we go forward, your total pension liability at June 30, 15 for your June 30, 16 financial statement, that increased to 55.7 million. Since I'm not sure there are very many accountants who drafted this language, I will beat up a little bit on them. The next line, so that total pension liability, that's the actuarial accrued liability. The next line, fiduciary net position, that's the market value of assets. And so your net pension liability, that's your unfunded liability. So what happened is your unfunded liability, or the amount going on your financial statement, increasing from 11.3 million to 13.4 million, split between miscellaneous and safety. Miscellaneous about 9.4 million at June 30, 15, 4.5 million for safety. The reason the numbers went up, it's really one very simple reason. It's because the CalPERS investment return, these are measured on a market value basis, from June 30, 14 to June 30, 15 was not very good, to be kind of polite.
Yeah, I have a question just to make sure, because there's a lot of terminology I'm just not familiar with. So our total pension liability is 55 million and a half.
Yeah.
And then our net position right now we have 41 and a little over $500,000
That's correct.
that we've accrued, that we have sitting there.
That's right.
And at this moment, what we need to make up is $13.8 million.
That's correct. Yeah. So
I can't believe I understood that.
Yeah. No, that's
Totally
perfect.
new language.
So the only words I'm going to change is you use the term "at this moment."
Okay. All right.
So
at this moment,
is going to go in your June 30, 16 financial statement. It's actually not at June 30, 16. It's at the measurement date, which is the beginning of your year. So if we looked at that number at this moment, September 21st, then the actual number probably a little bit higher than 13.9 million, almost exclusively because investment return was worse than expected from June 30, 15 to now. So if you're pulling your checkbook out to write that check to pay the unfunded liability, you need a few more dollars than what appears there.
Gotcha.
But I'll kind of make a couple of comments. Number one, that fiduciary net position is a market value number. And anybody who follows the stock market from one day to the next knows that there is significant volatility in that number. So you should expect that even though you're paying your contribution CalPERS is asking you to pay, you should expect that number, that net pension liability number, will be volatile from one year to the next. So hopefully we'll see some good volatility in the next year, but the last 2 years have not been good volatility. It's been bad volatility.
What if you hit another 2008?
Say it again, please.
How did these funds do in 2008?
In 2000, I'm going to do this from memory.
Downturn.
Yeah. So I'll give you two numbers. So 2008 was bad, but not as bad as 2009. 2009, the investment return was very, very roughly negative 24%. The return for 2008 was positive, just not what CalPERS thought they were going to get. So anytime we're looking at what the investment return is, we have to compare it not to zero. So that minus 24 is not a 24% loss. CalPERS expected back then 7 3/4, so it's about a 32% difference from what CalPERS expected. So when you look at that unfunded liability, a very large portion of that is because of investment returns in June 30, 2008 and June 30, 2009. It's not to say that there isn't a component of that would be related to benefits. There is, but the big portion of that unfunded liability is investment losses, not benefit related.
Does council have any questions? Okay, good, thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm done, but I can keep talking if you...
But let me make one comment.
Okay.
And that's something that didn't come out clearly in this discussion. The fact that the city is putting away money to pre-fund this liability is important. The reason that is very important, if you look at the table that he showed, what has come out of the city budget over since fiscal year 2008, 2009, this is that column there that shows actual contribution. That totals about $4.1 million total. But if you look at what the city has by way of market value of assets, we have $6.8 million. So what that says is $2.8 million additional money has been generated through investment earnings. And the reason why we have that investment earnings is because the city decided to pre-fund and decided to set this money aside. In particular, that money that was set aside back in 2008, 2009, the $1.9 million. And good timing, whatever it was, that money basically doubled almost the following 2 years. I think he made the point that we should continue to set money aside, and I believe if we continue to do that, perhaps the next 5-8 years, maybe we would, if the market works in our favor, things are going to be to a point where we would not need to be setting money aside. Our pay-go basis will probably be sufficient to pay our benefits. But it is an important thing to keep in mind.
You know, I want to applaud you, Berwin, because that was your council. You're the one sitting there that you guys voted for that. That was a really smooth move. And I want to invest where he puts the money.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
So we're going here. All right, going to 1C, proposed speed hump policy review, Director of Public Works.
Good afternoon. As you know, in this item here, we're bringing forth because there's been a lot of discussion in our efforts in the city to mitigate traffic issues related to speed, careless driving, etc. And we've looked at a lot of different measures to help mitigate various issues in various different streets. And we've looked at the feedback signs, we've looked at striping, we've looked at median islands, different, physical improvements, some mechanical, passive, etc. And this is an item that has been discussed many times in the past, going through past literature, as far as whether or not speed humps or speed tables are an option or an idea that the city wants to undertake. But there's never been an official policy or position taken by any of the previous discussions that have been done by either council or in past commissions. So, and it has been mentioned recently since I came on board, and it was a kind of instructions basically to kind of bring this forth and tell us what options are available, what's been done out in the industry. And the goal of this process is to, again, have a general workshop. It's not meant to make any final decisions today, but at least give the material to you. Part of that material was given in the the staff report, which explains what we provided. We also gave you the draft policy as it is written right now. It's not the final policy. It can be adjusted. An application process that comes with that again, and all this was put together by looking at many other agencies of what they've done. What I will say is that in this process, there is not one magic bullet. Nobody's done the same policy the same way. It's all kind of what they felt was relevant to their needs and their communities of how they wanted to implement it, what restrictions they wanted to have. So there is no standard that's in the industry that you must do X, Y, and Z. So this is a very fluid document, but based off of what we've seen in other agencies, is what we put together was reasonable, prudent, was similar and common in many agencies. We saw repeated concerns and conditions they wanted to place on consideration. So what I've done here today is giving you a general presentation, and feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have any particular questions, and we'll get started real quick. And I do want to say that this process has been vetted, and it'll be in this presentation too, but we did go to the STUC committee and ask them to review it, give their general opinions. We did give it to police and fire to have them review, to give us their opinion. So now we're at this point where we want to bring it to you to kind of get your thoughts and where we want to take this. Our goal, hopefully, is to come from this workshop with a clear understanding that either the City Council wants to go forth with a policy or does not. And either way, we would come back to Council with an official statement, either a draft policy that you're going to officially approve, or something that goes in the municipal code that says that the City Council at this date hereby declares that speed humps and speed tables are prohibited. We want to kind of settle this issue so we're not wondering meeting to meeting what can we do or should we do it. So that's the ultimate goal for me, at least, as someone who has to implement the program, is let me know one way or the other what we're going to do and the direction you want me to follow. So existing traffic measures that we discussed, we have focused traffic enforcement that's working with our Sheriff's Department and looking at specific areas that they've been contacted about and going through those areas and trying to obviously catch speeders or reckless driving, ticket them, etc. Roadway marking improvements such as new striping that we're putting in, and new additional posting of signs. We're adding signs to make it more clear, more visible that, hey, this is 25 mile zone or this is a 35 mile zone, or caution turns coming up so they reduce their speed. We've done the rest in red that we did on North Drive. It's been effective. We've now done the dynamic feedback signs that we're experimenting with. Some of them are permanent, some of them are mobile. We're now moving a couple of them around the street, trying collect different data to kind of see how folks react to it. And then recently the council approved the implementation of the rectangular rapid flashing beacons, what we're going to do on the crosswalks in front on Temescal in front of the elementary school. So again, we're going to try that, see if it works, see if it's something we may end up doing in the future at other locations, because it is a proactive measure. But we've done a prudent one step at a time approach and look at these things rather than just piling it on and realizing it may not work for everywhere. So we're trying to be very diligent in how we use our funds and what actions we take. And all these are meant to be samples of what could be done, the impacts, and then deciding later on what we want to do, invest our time and resources on. Because all this has maintenance, all this has a cost. So we want to get good information for the council to decide how much more they want to do of any of these items in the future. So speed humps, speed tables, what are speed humps and speed tables? They're simple definition. They're a physical traffic calming device used to reduce vehicle speeds and volume on residential streets. They're placed across the roadway, and that's the entire length of the roadway, not just a piece of it, but the entire length from basically curb to curb, and are often installed in a series, so 1 or 2 or 3, depending how long the length of the street might be, in order to impact the speed of the vehicles and the number of vehicles that might be going through that area. Speed humps, and what I've done here is try to give at least a visual impression of what the difference of speed humps, speed tables, speed cushions are. So basically a speed hump, again, it's about 12 feet wide, and as far as its width, its length is, again, all these speed tables, speed humps are curb to curb, or gutter to gutter, basically. If we had gutters, they're gutter to gutter. And basically it's 12 feet wide, and this one's just a gradual mounding over 12 feet, about 3 to 4 inches in height. So if you can imagine that, I'm sure most of us have gone over speed humps, speed tables at one point, but this is a visual diagram what it is. Oops, sorry. And here's kind of just an idea. So this is generally what you'd look at with all speed humps, speed tables, speed cushions. It will come with mandatory striping that's required under the MUTC code. And that means it's striping that is before the speed hump, telling you that there's something coming up. Signage that's telling it to come up, plus the speed hump or table itself will be striped. So a part of this is, again, they have to be visual. There's something coming, you want to see it. So that's what's required as far as when you install them. You have to have the proper signage and striping before the person comes up to that location. Speed tables, a little bit different. They're certainly wider. They're normally about 22 feet wide, mainly because what they try to do is they have a flat top, which is normally about 10 feet wide. So that basically, on most small vehicles, the entire vehicle is fitted right on top of that speed table, and then they go back down a bump, versus it's going up and down on a speed hump. It's more of a gradual increase and decrease. Here, they're physically standing up on the top, almost like a ledge, and coming back down. And here's a visual interpretation of what that would look like. In the small vehicles, that's basically what you'd have. Again, you still have the same striping, the same signage, everything required. Speed cushions, this is an alternate that has been developed by some agencies to use. And what this is basically a speed hump, but in sections. Or speed table. It's basically a speed hump though, because it's more rounded. It's not a top. There's no top on it. And basically, what they do is they create small sections within a two-lane roadway, or even a 4-lane roadway, that allows gaps. And the intent is mainly to do it for emergency vehicles. That's really why they do it. The appearance is that it allows emergency vehicles to traverse, and it's usually in the center median area. So in this case, they're showing 2 lanes going straight. Normally, if it's, let's say this picture here, it's one direction, you'd have the cushion in the middle of the roadway, and then a space on each side, and then the cushions or speed humps, on the other, in the two lanes, so that in theory, the emergency vehicle would go through the middle, and its tires could traverse through between the cushions. So basically, just keep in mind, it's a speed hump, same width, but it's just segmented. And this is kind of what it would look like. There's many different versions of it. This is a street. It's basically a 2-lane street, but it's wider than that. But this kind of gives you an idea. This is more of a residential area that has curbs and gutters, etc. The thought is this reduces speed or reduces the number of vehicles, but allows it easier for maybe emergency vehicles to come through. So the speed hump policy, currently, again, there's no existing ordinance or policy regarding speed humps, speed tables in the city. And so we researched as many agencies as we could to kind of get some ideas of how we should develop policy, why they did or did not, and we considered all those. My goal was to simply create a policy with the assumption that council was going to adopt it, and it's something that's reasonable to implement, and was functional and had a process, a clear process that treated everybody came in the same way. And that way it could be evaluated appropriately, but if council still decided they didn't want to do a policy, again, we just have something we put on the shelf if it ever came up again. So, and you've been given the draft speed policy, which was prepared for your consideration and feedback. Again, it was reviewed by police, fire, and the STUC committee. Policy highlights the application process, which is first, and we gave you an example of the application. It would require an X number of signatures. In our case, we chose 85% of the existing homeowners on any street, and that's mainly to get a buy-in. We didn't want 50% plus 1, and you got half the street against the other half of the street. So getting a majority means there's at least a pretty good consensus that the folks who live on that street want this. And the renters cannot be the ones who sign the petition. It has to be the legal owners of that property. And then it's mainly for streets that are 25, it's really for us, it's only 25 miles or less, and it's 2 lanes of traffic. If there's 4 lanes, we wouldn't recommend, 2 in each direction, we wouldn't recommend putting in speed hump because it's usually a collector street, high flow of traffic. And this is meant to be for those non-collector streets, arterials, that, it's pretty much just two-way traffic only in 2 lanes. The street segment must be at least a quarter mile long. And the folks that do the application must pay an application and review fee. And I'll explain why we need that. when we do the review process, we're going to conduct an extensive review to determine that speed humps could be engineered properly and safely in the street that they want. And we have all kinds of criteria that we're going to look at. Not all this is stated here, and all of it's not stated in the policy. The policies mainly give the guidelines of what we're going to look at. We did not list every single item we're going to look at because it is very subjective based off the type of the street it is. We're going to look for the bigger ticket items. If we ever got the issue where we reject something, but it's something that we have to be logical with, and we're not going to carry every scenario in the policy. It's just too broad, and we'd have a full book of all the scenarios. But in general, it will be a fairly succinct process for us as reviewing it. But part of that is we need to obtain speed study related information, and that has a cost to it. It costs about $500 just to do the speed study, and that's just to get counts and the 85th percentile. That's not an official report or comments from the traffic engineer company. That's just to get us the data. And the data is important for us because that's part of the requirements in determining whether or not it's an acceptable street to put speed humps on. So our time is really not going to be covered as far as staff. So I at least covered the outside entity cost to get us that data. The requirements would be, based off the data, is that it has 85% of the motorists must exceed 25 miles per hour by 5 miles per hour. A lot of the studies, they've done 10 miles per hour. I was really generous. I said 5. Realistically, in my opinion, in retrospect, it probably should be 10 because in most of the cases, 5 is pretty much everybody goes over 5 miles an hour. So if I had a suggestion now that I'd want to put out is I would probably change that to 10. And then so that way anything over 10 miles an hour on the 85th percentile. So if it was 11 miles, if the 85th percentile was 11 miles per hour, it would qualify as a street that could get speed humps. 5 is pretty low. Almost every street would get that. Just to be honest, almost be 100%. So I would self-admit I went too low on that. So I would recommend that we make that 10. And then daily traffic counts. We want to get the number of cars. Is the issue that's being requested, is there a high volume of cars coming through? And again, this one is all over the place depending on what agency you looked at. Some went down to 500 cars, some did it 4,000 cars as a minimum. It just depends on the type of city they are, the number of people, etc. So I chose 2,000 vehicles. That number could be different as far as the minimum. The high, I would say, again, 4,000. It was pretty consistent. A lot of folks chose about 4,000. Once it gets to that number, it's really getting a high traffic flow, and that would be really causing some burdens if you have that many cars on the road every day. Having to slow down for the speed humps, you could potentially really impact your traffic in other areas. So there's a point where we want to say the number of cars is it a factor, but is it the deciding factor? And in this case, we came up with a ratio. Again, we can make it whatever we want, but this is the kind of what I saw what different agencies were using in their speed hump policies. Then placement of speed humps require property owner approval, meaning if we determine that the proper place to place these speed humps is in front of this person's property, they have to sign saying they're okay with us putting it there, because it does potentially have an issue related to property values. And also the noise, and we'll talk about this later, there is noise related to speed humps, people slowing down and taking off. So, and if it's in front of your house, you're getting the bulk of that noise. So we want to make sure that the person where we put it, because they potentially could be a person that actually never signed the petition because they disagreed with it. So, and that could be an issue. But if we engineering-wise determine this is really the only place to put it because there's a hydrant over here, there's a stoplight over there, we want a certain amount of distance, and this is the only safe place to engineer and place it, and they don't agree, that basically stops the process, meaning they have to agree on it. So that's something I felt was very important to make sure in this process that somebody wasn't getting stuck with something right in front of their house and they never wanted it to happen. So we're requiring those property owners on either side, if it's directly in front of their property, that they have to do that. If it was like on a side yard, not directly in front of their driveway area, we wouldn't require it at that point because it's really incidental to their property. Then again, we would give this information to police and fire. Again, this is if we go through the process and we've engineered it and said, they can be done. we have gotten the property owners to agree to it, that they want it in front of their homes. Then we would give that plan or proposal to police and fire to review so that they can say, okay, we have an actual plan. This was actually being proposed. Please give us your comments. And then what the plan is we would take their written recommendation, or whether it's approval or denial, to the city council with our basic indication as a staff that we say they can be engineered properly. Here's how it would be done. Here's your map showing where we place them. Here's the signage that we do. We try to give you a diagram and a rendering of what it would look like. And then we'd also come with public safety's comments or opinion. And then council would ultimately decide, do you want to occur on this street? So that's the biggest part of this process is it always goes to council to approve everyone, to make sure that it comes back to this body and making that final decision. And then finally, the residents bear the entire cost for the installation of the speed humps. And again, this is all over the spectrum, and depending what type of policy you have. Some places pay for it all, some pay it's 50-50. It's really whatever you want. And why I went with they should bear the cost is simply we don't have the funds to pay for speed humps. It's already going to cost us once these are in to maintain them. So we're at least getting the residents buy-in so they paid for it. We end up putting them in for them through our contractor, and that includes all the costs. The speed humps, the signage, the striping will all be bundled into a cost that they would have to pay. We would give that to them up front so they know, do you want to do it? And then ultimately they would have to give us the money first, and then we'd go out and do the work. Whether that was one person decided to pay for it or they found some way to get people on the street to pitch in for it. We don't care how the money comes in. We simply want the full payment done, because that after that's finished, we have the full liability as far as maintaining that, because now we've put it in as a measure that council has approved, the residents wanted, and the council has approved that. But I thought it was most prudent because of our financial situation in maintaining our streets and where our money needs to go, is that it was more than reasonable to have those residents who wanted it on their street to pay for it. Now the pros. It can reduce speeds, certainly. It can divert traffic to other streets, so maybe you don't have as many vehicles because folks get used to it. There's a speed hump, speed table on this road. I'm going to go to the adjacent one. And as you know, we have a lot of checkerboard type of streets, so we just go one down one block and go down the same direction, and it's real easy to divert yourself on another street. Residents generally support the use, and it's a general comment that use it. It has the potential to reduce accidents. You know, if there's a high issue of speed, fewer citizen complaints of speed because of reducing the speeds, potentially increase safety. And again, these are things I pulled off from different groups that talked about the benefits. Potential noise reduction from less cars. But you have the cons, which ironically mirrors what the pros are. May not reduce speeds as residents expect. And that's the biggest thing, is it's the residents' expectation of what should have occurred by putting these in. They put this money in, and guess what? It didn't reduce the speeds because, again, speed humps aren't like a speed bump where it's your car is jarred. It's a gradual just going over. And folks, once they realize they've done it a couple times, they go, well, why not if I go 5 miles an hour more? And then a little more. And finally, they're going the speeds they were going because they're not bottoming out. Because again, this is not that type of a device where it causes that way. It's very gradual. It can divert traffic to another street, thus moving the problem to someone else. And again, that's part of the process we're going to look at is if we put in speed humps as an engineering measure, and we determine this is only going to move people to the adjacent street and just move the problem down there, it really didn't solve anything other than for those folks. We don't want to create a problem for another group for the sake of another group. You know, we don't want to pit groups together. So we do have to look at that and kind of decide, does this make sense? You know, is this prudent? So that's going to be part of what we're going to analyze, at least, and give you information that we think or have concerns that even though we can engineer it, there's a good likelihood those folks may just go down one block down over and just all go in that direction, and then the problem's just moved. And again, my goal is to give you as much information as possible to make your end decision. Then there could be a reduction in emergency response times, and that's a big issue that's stated in many of the reports. Is there is a possibility that, again, they're having to slow down because these are big trucks. If you're talking about fire, they have to slow down for these because they're heavy equipment. They're not going to boil over them and not care. It's the same thing with ambulances. If you have them on certain streets, the ambulance coming down, they've got to slow down for that, and to either coming in or getting out. So it can impact response times. And again, and later on, I would gladly have police and fire answer any specific questions you have regarding that and their concerns related to that. But I did want to highlight that is certainly an impact that can happen. You're going to add signage and striping, which may become objectionable to the residents. They don't realize I'm just getting a speed hump, should be no big deal. We're going to be putting very big lettering out the street saying speed humps, so we're warning folks. The humps themselves will be striped bright white. As you saw in previous pictures, we're going to have signage, so there will be additional things that they may feel is an eyesore. But again, some folks may not, they may be happy with that, because again, if it has the impact they want, it may be okay. But there is I pointed at many studies, folks didn't realize what was going to be done to put them in properly. And the noise levels may increase, because even though you may reduce the number of cars, in theory, the noise does increase. In every study they say it does increase because of the fact you're braking to slow down and then you're gunning it to go to the next one. Whether or not they're 100 feet apart, people still gun at that 100 feet, even though they shouldn't, they don't need to, because there's another one, they do. That's just habit. It's just, we do that. And so there's a lot of noise not only going over the bump and what it might make in your vehicle and hear things moving around, or old trucks bobbing. I mean, our cars make noise when they go over stuff like that. It's the deceleration and the acceleration you have. So people will get annoyed by that. I'm just hearing all this noise. It's rickety. That's why we want to make sure when it's put in front of somebody's home, they understand that what they could get into, that's in front of their house, they're getting all that noise. That's why we want them to sign and say, yes, I will accept that I want that in front of my house. And then ongoing maintenance for the city. Obviously, we have to do the restriping, any signage. At some point, once it gets worn away, we have to replace it. And we take that burden of finally replacing them. And then there's obviously the potential of reduction of property values, as far as, folks that want to buy homes may not want to buy them in those areas because they just don't like them. So that could be an issue. And then the other issue we have experienced in the past, and actually here in Norco, is that because we have a couple places that have speed humps, is that folks literally going around them in the parkway or in the trail just to go around them. We've had to put bollards in the trail so that they don't do that. And because we don't have curbs and gutters, that's a very real possibility, is that folks, depending again where we place them, and if we can place them in a place that maybe has a tree next to it or has a curb and gutter, that they can't do that, then we've engineered it out automatically. But other places, we'll have to physically put a bollard in the parkway or in the trail to make sure, or fencing up if there's not already fencing, something to make sure these individuals who make that choice can't make that choice. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Council have any questions?
Irwin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chad. That's a good report, and I appreciate the time you and staff and the commission spent on this. But the thing that is hard for me to go along with this plan is the citizens pay for public safety. Police protection and speed and all that, although we've been short for a few years of having speed control, but that's because of the funding. But I have a problem with the residents having to pay for these things. They're already paying for public safety and everything, and to me, reading all this staff report and everything on that's just another way to discourage putting in the speed humps. That's my thinking, and I know a lot of people in town, and I can't imagine one street or one block getting enough people on one block to pay for a speed hump in here in Norco.
And I understand and I respect that, but keep in mind that this is a improvement that only benefits that street. Right. So that's one of the concerns we have, in that we're doing public safety, but only benefits that street in a physical improvement that costs X amount of money, but it really only benefits that street. So that was the thought of, then they should buy into it somehow, whether it was 100% or 50%. That is a common thing that I've seen in the reports that I read, is that again, some of it's 100% free, some of it's 50%, some of it's 100%. 100%. So it's just a question of the preference, and I have no concern either way. It was just in trying to balance this out that we're recognizing we're doing work and maintenance, whether or not it was appropriate for the residents to pay.
Well, I realize that, and like I said, the residents are going to say, we already pay for public safety. We should hire more police to control the speed, which we can't afford it, and I know we can't afford to put these things in ourselves, but I'm just going to say we're going to run into a wall with most of the residents in this town wanting to chip in for a speed hump.
Well, I can tell you from the Stuck Committee, I forgot the gentleman's name, he was willing to pay for it all himself to get it on his own street. He'd do it right now if he could.
Well, they might be a few, but they'd be few and far between.
Right, I understand.
Thank you very much.
Sir.
Robin, anything?
Just a couple questions for you, Chad. When we talk about the ongoing maintenance costs for the city, have those been figured out
No.
for speed hump or any of that kind of
It's
stuff?
really going to be about striping as it fades. I mean, really, we don't do striping as it fades. It's not a scheduled thing on any street. We see an issue, and obviously, a lot of our striping really isn't up to snuff. So we're behind on most of our city striping, and that's what we're trying to get caught up on. But in this case, again, it would based off of how it fades, and we look at it and say, okay, it's time to go out there and restripe that area. The cost-wise for striping, if I had to venture, signage itself would be about $500 for the poles and the signs, whatnot, and then striping, maybe another $500 at most, if we're doing it a certain amount of years. So you're talking about probably $1,000 of per section of speed humps if we're just doing the maintenance. As far as if we get into replacement because they got worn down or need to be repaired, that's, again, each speed hump, depending on the size and the length, we've estimated anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000.
Right.
It just depends, because every street's going to be a little bit wider and et cetera, and it's unknown. But again, how long that would be will really depend on the wear of that street.
Was any of that data available when you were talking to any of the other cities, like how often they were having to go back and do the asphalt replacement or patching or any of that?
I didn't see anything regarding the ongoing maintenance. It was a comment just talking about, there is ongoing maintenance, but then no one ever really quantified what that was.
Okay.
Because obviously it would probably be more about how many they had and whatnot, but no one ever gave that information that I saw.
Okay, and then you talked about the daily traffic has to be greater than 2,000 vehicles, just, you put this in the report, but what are the averages on some of the streets that we get a high number of complaints on, like let's say Crestview? What's the average? And I know that was in a report a couple months ago, but...
Yeah, I don't know this number offhand. I mean, every street is different. I mean, so I'm not sure. I apologize. I didn't come prepared to answer what the counts are on certain streets. I know Crestview was a lot less than, say, California.
Right.
By several thousand. I think it was 10,000. I don't know the number. I can't remember what we reported before. It was a significant number on California, more than on Crestview. But obviously, California is a street that's 40 miles an hour. It's 2-lane, but it's 40 miles an hour. And Crestview is 25, I think. But I don't have those counts.
Okay, I was just asking because I'm wondering how many of our streets in Norco are going to meet the thresholds, that aren't collector streets that are taking people to different areas. So, yeah, 7th, I would guess, because that was one of the ones that was collecting a bunch, but...
And that's a number we can modify so it's more relevant. We just did a study on Corona in one segment, and I think the counts were over 1,000 a day. So, like I said, that it was just an example of what we've done recently. Maybe that's a more prudent number. It's anything over 1,000. Like I said, it's a policy we can massage.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Ted?
Yeah, Chad, this is, at least we're starting somewhere. For that, I appreciate it. I'm glad you involved the Streets and Trails Utility Commission on this. I'm like Berwin. I have a hard time asking residents or the property owners wanting to pay for the application fee. They may chip in $500, but then you turn around and ask those same residents to go ahead and pay for an improvement on a street. For one, it's the person spearheading it is going to get, he's gonna have to collect those funds. We have no way to do that.
Right.
And then personally collecting it, I think we're asking for a financial nightmare somewhere along the line, and I'm sure the city attorney said, how do you pay for that once you collect it? How do you do that? So I just, doing it that way when I'm like Berwin, these people all live here, we don't expect all our property taxes to pay for public safety, but we expect as a city, that's one of our jobs, is the safety of these residents and provide some kind of a street. Councils years back said slow them down by having dirt roads. Well, that's not acceptable. But I'm glad you looked at this. There are certain streets in town, and when I was on Streets and Trails, we looked at doing certain streets, and I know the one you're talking about, and that gentleman, that was Bluff. He would love to have one down on his street to slow everybody down, because it's a nightmare where he lives. But the same as when we talked about having Crestview, is we had to do something with Crestview. And what do those are the streets that we need to address. And I'm a firm believer in, and I know fire and police will probably say, well, speed humps they create code 3 response problems, and they're right. That's why I'm a big fan of speed cushions. Yes, people do cross over and things like that. But I think we need to look at this a little further with that, we want to develop a policy that's going to work well, not only for us right now, but in perpetuity, so that people have a chance to look at these. But I just can't see how we can ask the residents to chip anything that's our responsibility. And then we are the final say, and they're putting the money up, whether it goes or not, after they spent money. Boy, it doesn't sit well with me, but you can see that. That's why I look at it. I would like to see if you also on your review process that once before it comes back to City Council, that it also goes and gets something from the planning department to make sure that the overall general, they're supposed to have a general plan, something about streets and things like that. I know you do the streets, but also streets and trails.
Yeah, in a couple issues on that. And again, I understand that I knew the dollar issue is going to be one of the key factors on this. I guess my concern as the administrator, if that's what we do this policy, is that we potentially get inundated with tons of applications, and with, again, doing speed studies at $500 a pop on whatever streets they may want that isn't funded in some way could heavily burden an already very thin, as we already know, street program, because it's relative, and it's basically contingent on the Measure A funds and tax dollars that we get in. So I'm just concerned that, in trying to encourage somehow of a partnership or buy-in by the community in some way, that they're really serious about that process, whether or not it's part of the application or part of the final construction. But we could easily be inundated with a ton of requests once we make this an official policy, that we frankly don't have time to do that many. So part of this is really, honestly, trying to vet out who's really serious about wants this and is willing to be a partner in that process, as far as the way I arrange that. I didn't try to arrange it to be overly burdensome, you'd never do it. But so that's my concern there. It's just trying to make sure that we're looking at what the staff is going to have to do to implement this and maintain these going forward, because it's not just the installation, it will be the maintenance going on. And so that's that one concern there. In regards to planning commission, or you mentioned
planning department.
Planning department. Is it more, just so I understand, just recognize, because it could be part of our internal engineering review process of just simply saying and I apologize, don't know the parts of the planning, that the general plan has these requirements, and is it consistent with the general plans of what you want us to make sure we do in our review process?
Just something like a negative deck in there, just to say, hey, yes, it won't cause any problem to what we've going on there. Just so everybody works on this together type of a thing, so that it is not something that just comes up where something is going to be built in the future, or a project is going on.
Okay.
That was my review for just the planning department. It doesn't have to be the commission. But I definitely would like to have the streets and trails again, look at each application. And
Just on that, since you mentioned it, again, I think that's a concern for me in regards to, again, it's a very subjective review. You're asking a residence to review another resident's request, and as you know, committees change and opinions change on the committees, and I think to me, if engineering has looked at it, fire and safety has looked at it, you had your experts tell you whether or not it's appropriate and safe to put in, and whether or not, engineering-wise, and whether or not it's appropriate for public safety, that I think it's more prudent at that point to go before council, because you're the ultimate decision maker, because I think you're injecting more opinions in the process of whether somebody should get something that they have applied for, they believe is important to them. And for me, I'd rather see the council decide that after we've engineered and spent the time on it, and public safety has done that. That's just my thoughts on that. I'm just trying to eliminate the levels we have to go through to get it to you for a decision, because my concern is getting it done, and whether it's yes or no moving forward, rather than dragging it through a process, which again, we only meet every other month, and I may have to wait another month and a half to finally get that review, when I could just get it done now by taking it to council. So again, my prejudice is just expediency of getting it done, because that's my goal. Is just, I'm here to get stuff done and finished. So that's why my recommendation would not be add another level of review to it, but that's entirely up to the council.
Just my thoughts, and the other councilor will have to. The thing, we still do traffic surveys every 3 years?
I believe.
Speed surveys?
Yeah.
Every 3 years. 5 years now? 5 throughout town?
Yeah.
So the data is there within reason.
Essentially, yes.
And so but you're getting, and I'll look over Dominic, we're getting number counts, we're getting traffic counts, or speed counts.
Yeah.
So that data is already there, so we're not actually, we could utilize that. Mm-hmm. The Sheriff's Department has their traffic counts that they keep through Switters that shows the number of accidents in areas. They also keep an area, I'm sure they keep in their traffic files where accidents occur, where they had the most speed citations written. So that's also in-house. I'm just trying to eliminate trying to look at a $500 cost for you when there's data already generated that we have.
Right. And that's a very valid point. We can, depending how old the data is and whether we're comfortable with in our policy using potentially 4-year-old data, then that's okay for me too. It was just more, again, of recognizing questions have been made, let me go get the information, because basically they were paying for it. I'll get updated information and do that. If our goal is to not put a financial burden on it, then obviously we want to go to the next best data, which is going to be the speed data that was referenced.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. That's enough. Thank you.
Greg?
Thanks, Kevin. Chad. I certainly agree that we should have a written policy, something that we can refer back to. Let me make my first comment to help you out with what Ted was saying, is that with this also going back to streets and trails, it should also go back to the Planning Commission as part of our circulation element, which that element has to support our land use element. So certainly it should be reviewed by the Planning Commission. The couple of notes that I made were, I don't agree with going 10 miles over the 25-mile limit you set. That I think the 5 is sufficient. 25 is the speed limit. It's an animal keeping community. It should be 25. Okay, so to bump it another 10, I'm not in agreement with that. I'd leave it at the 5. Little concern on that, and you said that would be fluid with the traffic count of 2,000 vehicles a day. And I'm going to come back to this, but when we talked about our innovative traffic calming at California North, and that traffic count that was cut through traffic down 7th Street, I think was approximately 1,500 cars a day. Wasn't it? I'm pretty sure that number was...
3,000.
Yeah, I thought... Okay, all right. Somewhere in that 10,000, I thought it was like 7,500 going down California and 15 cutting through on 7th Street. Okay. Regardless. No, I'm not up that early, so I couldn't tell you. But there are certain streets, I think 2,000 would be the higher number. But as long as that's fluid and could be less.
Yeah, but if and when we adopted a policy, we'd want to set the number we thought council felt was fair as a low and a high range. So if I think it's 500 will be our low, 4,000 will be our high. We'll just set that range, and that's what we're going to work within.
And one of the things, and I kind of like the idea of the cushions and the speed cushions. Those can be adapted for public safety responses. But also on the speed tables, the height of the table can dictate what safe speed you can travel over that. That if your table, let's say, is an inch high, all right, that you can go over that at 30 miles an hour and you're not going to feel anything. If it's 4, 5, 6 inches higher, okay, that I think that dictates. There's some type of chart that I've seen that it's a relationship with the height of the speed table.
So, I mean, traditionally, again, it's usually like a
3 to 4.
It's 3 to 4. It's just, the difference is an area is flattened versus just being mounted with a speed.
Correct. Right.
Whether or not you could go higher, you could. That's not the designs I've seen. But it's certainly, again, we could choose the design we want. There is not an industry standard of your speed table, speed humps must be this way. But this is the traditional design.
I'm just trying to remember. I thought I'd seen some table that, let's say you're going 25 miles an hour, you can safely stay at 25 miles an hour over that speed table. And it's adjusted with the height of the table. And
there might be. I have not seen that.
And if you raise it to 12 inches, you'll slow it down.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, since for our purposes, since we're talking about 25 miles an hour streets only, this is pretty much what you would design.
Okay. I'll do some checking on that. I've seen that somewhere. But height of the tables. And then some of the research I did, and I don't know if Eric would agree with me or not, but on some of the pros that I read, that speed tables, traffic calming also helps in crime prevention. Have you ever read that, thought that?
I have not, nor have I seen anything that would give me that indication.
Okay.
You can share the publication with me. I'd be happy to take a look at it.
I can.
Okay.
I read that on the internet, so I know it.
So it must be the truth.
So it must be true. But it was a whole article on traffic calming and that, and it did make mention that it does assist in crime prevention. So I'll make sure you see that. I'm agreeing with Ted and Berwin on the cost borne by the property owners, though I do agree with you that maybe this can be massaged some way that, like you said, it's streets and trails. If somebody wants to stand up and say, I'm going to make an application and I'm paying for the whole thing, let them have at it. At the same time, I can see how you would be inundated with everybody that would just put in blanket requests. Okay, so let me detour a little bit and let's go back to, and with that conversation, that one, I'd like to know what the status is with our design of California North with our traffic calming, and I'd like to start seeing some date certains with that. But part of that past conversation that we had was when we had talked about 7th Street to look at traffic calming, speed tables, cushions, humps, whatever you want to call them. that cost should be borne by the city. When we looked at that bigger picture and trying to mitigate the concerns on 7th Street, I don't think this type of policy would work with saying, well, we'll do it if the property owners want to pay for it.
Well, again, that's partly why we wanted to bring this policy to you, because
Right.
it's harder for us to design or engineer something without having an understanding of what we are willing to do. So, but part of that is a concern and consideration as we do this, whether it's a city-initiated request and to just put in speed humps on a certain area, or speed tables in certain areas, that do you want to give the property owner consideration that they may not want it there, versus other areas where they did choose to be there because they were part of that process. Absolutely, the city can choose to put something in. Technically, the residents have no choice. But we're just, in this case, we want to make sure that if, as a resident-initiated process, that they did get the buy-in from that person we thought was more than fair, especially if they're not in favor of it, but they're stuck with it because that's the only place we could engineer it safely based off of XY conditions. It does bring up the point that you pointed out, is that, well, if the city-initiated process, they felt they wanted to do it, do you want to give that person the same consideration in our evaluation and design? If not, then I know I can just engineer it accordingly, but if I have that requirement based off of follow the same principles of the policy, then I would want to come to you and say, here's what we're proposing to do. We've already talked with the resident in question, residents in question. They're both okay with that. They're willing to, accept XY, sign on any information, or just they gave us a verbal written approval on something, so that you at least know when you're making your decision to spend the funds and authorize it, that those people immediately in front of the residents aren't going to be impacted. Everybody else adjacent to it may not be happy, or may be happy about speed humps, but we did give those folks consideration because it's right in front of their house. So that was,
and I would agree with you on that. And I would support you on that, Chad.
Just to finish your questions, you mentioned about, so that's why we're headed, why we haven't given you anything back on California 7th, because we want to get this part determined if it was something we're going to consider in our overall plan. In regards to California and North, everything that was presented to council related to the traffic calming has been completed, except for any of the vertical element in the median on North. That element I've held off on purposely because I wanted to see what the rest in red did, what the feedback signs did, to determine whether or not we wanted to spend funds on putting vertical elements and what those would be. I wanted to give it time. I wanted to review it to find out whether it had a significant impact as is, and we didn't need to spend the funds to do a vertical element, and also determine whether or not what that vertical element might be, whether it's simply just a bunch of large boulders, some sort of decorative thing, trees. All those have impacts as far as the cost, because we don't have water in that median, the future maintenance of trees, any decorative things, how they may or may not get vandalized. So it's a decision process, and that I made the conscious decision to wait on finishing that last element because I wanted to be able to provide council more data regarding an opinion whether I thought that what we've done has been effective or not, and so you can decide whether you want to spend additional funds, that whatever that might be, whether it's $20,000 or another $100,000 to do the median, and those type of improvements, that you had all the information to say, did we have to do this? Or is it simply, we want to do it anyway because it's a median, it looks ugly, we want to do something with it, etc. So I at least want to have that decision. Are we doing it because it's a traffic calming measure and that's why we're doing it, or simply just we want a better looking median? So that's why, so everything else has been completed, everything's in place, striping is done, but that's the only I have not done purposely, because I was trying to get more time on those measures, see how they're working, to bring something back to council to get your thoughts on whether you wanted to move forward on that, and also come with some ideas that we progressively would want to be hopefully low maintenance as far as for future stuff for us. So that's just it, to give you an update where we're at on those measures.
And I realize this isn't the proper agenda item or venue to talk any further about that. There's systemic problems with that intersection, and I don't know, maybe we're not, as council, communicating clearly enough with staff, but maybe at another time we need to sit down and talk about this, because what I'm hearing is we're missing the boat, okay? And then I have some other concerns, but this is not the policy that's in front of us today. The only thing I'd like to see if you can blend in with this policy, if possible, is when we rehab streets, renovate, whatever, that we still have that a consideration for traffic calming on any streets that we rehab. And I think that takes care of it. Other than that, I support you having a policy on file. Thank you.
What happened to the Perkowski put in pothole projects that we do every night at midnight? Can we put in more potholes? People thought it was an accident, but it's really, I'm kidding. Sorry. I think maybe in terms of streets and trails, I understand that you're trying to make this as quick as possible. Maybe streets and trails can go through it, vet it initially, and look at some of the different streets, something like that. I agree with Greg, it needs to go through planning. I think the 5 miles, I would have to agree with that because we worked so hard. And Berwyn was, I think Berwyn, you were involved in that, getting us to 25 miles an hour. Weren't you? In the NHA was that Frank Hall? And that was at a sacramental level, so I think we'd sort of be defeating our purpose if we went above that. Maybe the way to get around the people paying for it, and by the way, I would buy 2 of them on Pedley Avenue, boom, right now. It's a raceway, but maybe what we need to do is somehow determine which streets most need it, and maybe begin to test them, because I know we're going to test one over by Corydon, that new development. They're going to put one of those in maybe 7th Street. Maybe we find streets that seem to be the most in need.
That's the mystery question, is determining what's really needed, because once you put in one, it undoubtedly will move traffic a different place into a different degree, number of cars, which may alleviate the number of vehicles and the speeds, but also could push the problem someplace else. So we really won't be able to evaluate that until we put that first one in and see how it caused activities around that issue. I think it's more of I take it more of a literal, if it's needed, then it's needed. You put it in, and it's not whether or not it's the most important. It's just you put it in, you'll find out how it impacts somebody else, and then we'll deal with that. If folks come in and they're complaining that now we got more people, do we put another set? And then we need another set. At some point, folks just have to go down those streets and they can't divert anymore. And it's usually maybe 2 to 3 streets at most that they're willing to bypass to get around that area. Again, we're very checkered streets, so we're very easy to kind of go over one block and go another area. So you will see that impact, and you'll have folks come in with the next request. It came over here, I want to push these people away from me, and we keep kicking it down the road. But again, it's a desire of the community and the council. If it's to slow people down and make the street safer, then that's just what we are going to be doing, and that's okay for me as far as the policy. I just know how I have to implement it, the way I do it, and it's not about whether yours is more important than this person's. Is if it qualifies per the policy and it's gone through the process that you set up, it's approved. We go do it, and we just look to make sure we have the budget to put them in, versus putting them on a hierarchy. And there was only, for example, if we only set aside $50,000 or $25,000 a year for speed bump improvements or speed hump improvements, and therefore we maybe wipe it out after 2 applications, the other person has to wait till the next fiscal year. That's maybe where there's a priority list of when your application was done. We'll get to it in that point. But I guess my argument would be, since you have a policy, you want to be fair and equal to it, and not all of a sudden go, well, yours isn't worth doing, even though you've met everything. So it's just trying to make sure when I put something before you that you're not put in a position where you're having to pick and choose. I don't want to put you in that position. I want to say they met the criteria, and I was able to engineer it properly. Now do you want to give them approval to do it? And because obviously City Council is going to approve the expenditure of the funds. I don't want to overcomplicate it and find out, well, can you move this one up in front of this person now or this area? I want to hopefully take them in order they come and as the budget allows. But again, Council directs me to put this in first. I will put it in first.
Okay. So where do we go from here?
Mr. Mayor, can I have
a couple more
questions with Terry's over here now. Terry's been here a long time, and I think he'll know what I'm talking about because he's worked on the streets and the trails for a long time. They've been parked on the side of the road or in the road. And people, the sensible ones, will slow down for that, for workers and everything. But as soon as they get by the work, then they speed back up. So my concern with that, and they'll do it for the speed humps, their speed tables, they'll slow down, and as soon as they get by them, they'll go on with one. I think that would cause more people to speed because you'd cost them 2 seconds of their life on that. Plus, I think it would add to the people blowing the stop signs on that because they're late. I mean, they're later now. They're 2 seconds later than they were a while ago. Mm-hmm. And do you feel that way, Terry, on that? Because you've seen them go by you guys when you're working.
Convenience of the public seems to be what we live for. So
right.
Turn off the camera.
You are correct. When you inconvenience them, if this is going to be an effective policy, it's not one speed table, just say 7th Street between California and Pedley. Traffic.
Right.
Over and speedway.
And another thing, and I agree with you, if you put them up, you got to put some kind of a deterrent around here to keep people from going out in the trail or off to the side. If you put a curb there, and a lot of people don't know it, they're liable to swerve to miss that thing and hit the curb and land in somebody's yard or something. That's another thing to consider because they're rolling pretty quick and they could lose control real easy if they went over that curb. So
especially at night, our streets are dark, so
right, yeah,
they think they can go over and all of a sudden, they've hit something. But again, that's the whole point, is we're trying to make sure they don't. So if we do put a bollard in on one side, it's going to be painted and striped a certain way so that it will reflect off of their lights when they're driving. But that's something that's a necessary thing that we need to do in order to protect individuals that might be in the trail or in the parkway, and somebody's just making a bad decision going around it, and that's when accidents happen.
Right.
So
a lot of consideration to go in on that. But thanks again for the report and everything.
I would like to take a minute if both police and fire can give their input on the policy directly.
Greg had a comment first. Just one sec.
The other, and I don't know if there's validity to this or not, that in these articles that I read, not only with traffic tables, traffic humps, was elevating intersections, where you have situations where a lot of stop signs are being ignored, that they elevate the entire intersection.
I haven't seen that. It's interesting.
Yeah, and I kind of thought, that maybe there's some validity to that also, where we have situations where people are just blowing through stop signs, that these were elevated intersections. So I was just going to throw that out as another tool in the toolbox to you.
Yeah, Ted.
I'll give you an example. The city of Lake Elsinore, they had the reverse thing. They just keep cutting the drains deeper and deeper on the streets and the intersections. So you have a situation like we have at 6th and Pedley. If you don't slow down there, you're going to lose your trailer. You're going to lose everything you got in the back seat. You may lose your lunch because if you hit it hard enough. But that's what they did through the residential areas and some of their streets, especially one called the Bird Track. They just cut the intersections down for drains. And I know we know streets and gutters, but that's how they slowed the traffic through a high crime area. Right. Was doing just that. Just a thought, just like he said. It actually does your raised intersection by cutting the drain
what you're saying there is by depressing that in a high crime area?
That's what it did. It slowed people down.
Something to do with
it did.
Prevention?
Yes, it did. Bird Track in Lake Elsinore. Back in the...
So should we go to cars or should we go to... What do you want?
I got another question from. He's asking about horse trailers. Well, if you're pulling a horse trailer, if you pull one very long, in my opinion, you should know to slow down where there's dips, bumps, or whatever. Like Ted said, if you go across 6th Street down there at Pedley, if you're speeding, you're liable to take your bumper off. Your trailer's liable to take your bumper off when you go across there. It's pretty rough just in a vehicle without a trailer, but if anybody's pulled a trailer very long, they should use common sense about how fast they go across these humps and dips and whatever like that. And I don't think a speed table to go on a normal speed, say 25 mile an hour, 30. I don't think that, you slow down to get on it. I don't think it's going to affect the horses that much in there. Do you, Newton? Yeah, going the wrong way, that's okay.
Let's go ahead and go to Eric, and then if people have comments and they comment, they can see the report and go by that. Police and fire.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of City Council, City staff. So from a Sheriff's Department and law enforcement perspective, we obviously do have some concerns. And I think it would help to explain the background behind a Sheriff's Code 3 response. And what that means is we're rolling with our lights and sirens because we have to get to a location quickly. And there's actually a vehicle code that allows us to speed and basically bypass certain vehicle codes, including speeding laws, but making sure we have obviously the public safety in account. So one of the things that we respond to the most, because we're always out in the field, we don't deploy technically from a certain location. Our deputies are out in the field handling calls. I've looked at our calls for service, and in what I've experienced based on my 26 years of law enforcement, our number one Code 3 response is to what's called a juvenile medical and juvenile medical aid. Now what that means, it has several different meanings actually. One of the more common is a baby not breathing call. So obviously getting there quickly and in the most expeditious manner is very, very important, because at that point it's seconds and minutes at stake that we could have a life-saving impact, or it goes the other way, unfortunately. So that's probably our number one response, Code 3 response. The other one in terms of a juvenile medical aid that's become more common are drownings or near drownings, where our deputies are actually getting on scene and having to administer CPR. And that's just something to consider, because again, you're talking about seconds, minutes being critical to that response. And then also we respond Code 3 to our traffic accidents when we have an injury. If we have a vehicle fire involved, if people are ejected, we need to get there quickly and fastly. So anytime we have responses to these types of things, we need to get there quickly, because we could be the difference between ultimately life and death based on our ability to administer CPR. Now, obviously, we are first responders. My partner in fire in the Riverside County Fire Department do an excellent job. They respond, and I'll let him talk to their response, but they respond most likely from a station or a fixed location. So in those instances, we're actually on scene faster. We're there quicker because we're already out in the field. And then some other things to take in consideration are not only traffic collisions, but assaults in progress, shootings, and if we ever have an active shooter. So obviously we have concerns. We want to get there as quickly as possible, and understanding that if we have a speed deterrent in place like a speed bump, we have to slow down in just the same manner as a regular vehicle in order to pass by the speed deterrent. If we speed over that object, then we're going to do some damage to our car, the roadway, and there may be some other mitigating circumstances. So that's just something to keep in mind. If vehicles are having to slow down, we have to slow down in the same manner. And that's essentially what we have to offer with that.
Thank you. Scott?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. So first, I'd like to state that CAL FIRE, Riverside County Fire, countywide for the 21 cities we serve and all the unincorporated areas, strongly oppose any speed humps, speed tables, or speed cushions countywide. Essentially what you're doing is putting hurdles in our way from arriving on scene. Our standard to respond and arrive on scene is 5 minutes or less in incorporated areas and cities. We meet that the majority of the time in the city of Norco. Each speed table or speed hump that you put in the way adds approximately 11 seconds. So when you're talking about a street like 7th and going from end to end, essentially you've added a minute or more to that response. So we'll talk about sudden cardiac death. If we can't arrive to you when you collapse from a heart attack in 5 minutes or less, the chance that we're going to be able to resuscitate you is almost a zero. That's the simple fact. Whether it's an adult, whether it's an infant, it doesn't matter. So I'll ask you this. If we were sitting here right now, would you want 11 speed tables in your way from us getting to this room with someone having a heart attack? The answer would probably be no. There's a reason why we don't support them, nor any other fire department in this county support them being implemented in their cities. But we do understand the public's concern. We like the policy as it's written, and we will evaluate each one on a case-by-case basis. We can't have a blind line rule that says we're going to deny everyone that comes across our desk. The 2013 California Fire Code, section 503.4.1, which this city adopted, traffic calming devices shall be prohibited unless approved by the fire code official. That is a statewide fire code. There is not a fire department in this state that is pro putting any hurdles in our way. The other issue is your fire stations are all strategically placed, so we do arrive within 5 minutes. The north end of this city is covered very well, between the Corydon station, the Hillside station, and the Hamner station in Eastville. The south end of the city is not. If the Hamner station is not there, which again is a state fire station funded by the state of California, then those engine companies are responding from Hillside or Corydon. As it is now, it takes us a while to get down there, especially in the Norco Hills area. You add speed tables in the way, it's going to take us even longer. It's going to result in some casualties. That's the bottom line. Those folks then in turn are going to be here upset because we didn't arrive and we couldn't make those life-saving changes. It's the same thing between heart attack and stroke. We have to get there in 5 minutes or less to give you the medications, advanced life support, the system that these residents have opted into to save your life. It's bottom line. And I just have to be clear that the council understands that. Start putting hurdles in the way, we're not going to meet our response times, which we will then come back to you and recommend that we add additional fire stations so we can get to the residences in that 5 minutes. The speed cushions, while they look good on paper, do not accommodate the sheriff's department vehicles, our light duty vehicles, and I also want to take the time to remind you this isn't a 2-station fire department anymore. It's 100 fire stations countywide. At any given point in the day, you may have 6 different fire engines traversing this town that are not from here. So they're not a one-size-fits-all fix. The other part that we don't like about it is the speed cushion makes us go head on with opposing traffic. We already have a substantial issue throughout the state with vehicles yielding to emergency vehicles. Now I've got a vehicle coming at me head on, which any given time of the day, if I went down, let's say Pedley or Hillside right now, the vehicle coming at me is not going to pull over. Very rarely do they. Because they're coming in the direction opposing me. They think that they're not in my way. Yet they don't know that I'm trying to turn left into this driveway. Or this is where the baby's not breathing, etc., etc. So, in a perfect world, you have this cutout in the center that lines up great and we have to go opposing. Also requires us to be able to see down the road and that vehicle coming at us see us. But when they yield in front of it, or many times as you'll see, and I ask you all to pay attention, look at how many vehicles stop directly in front of us today. They don't pull to the right. Many occasions going down 6, they pull to the left and they stop in the center divider. Because as Terry said, we're inconveniencing them. They don't want to pull to the right because it takes longer. They'll stop right in the lane of traffic that we're in and we have to go around them. With all that being said, I just want council to understand the bottom line is it will reduce our response times, whether it be 1 or whether it be 11. So just want that out there.
Okay. Cards?
Yes, Mayor, I have one card on this item. Linda Martz.
Hi, Linda. How are you?
Good.
Good.
Good. I live on Kip's Corner.
Can you pull your... There.
I live on Kip's Corner, and so I'm representing some of my neighbors here. I'm sure you're all familiar with Kip's Corner. I've been to City Hall numerous times. I've lived there for 24 years, and I've been here, and I've talked with the fire department, and my neighbor's been here 41 years, so she knows the city really well. Anyway, we have a terrible traffic problem. I got up at 4 this morning to start counting. And since I went to bed at midnight, I went back to bed. Anyway, we've had car crashes. I had, in '98, I bought a brand new truck. I was over at my neighbor's house on that curve where the Western and Kip's Corner meet. My truck got hit by a car that came around the corner too fast and flipped over and hit my truck. Had it not hit my truck, it would have hit my son that was in the driveway. My son was on my property with his car several years later. Now he's parked with his car on my property. A vehicle came flying down our street, a drunk driver, and he totaled my son's car on my property. It wasn't in the street, it was on my property. My neighbor on the corner back over there on Western has had, I think, 3 vehicles land in his driveway. Unacceptable. He has now put some brick things there and a fence to help keep them from landing in his bedrooms. Right in front of my next door neighbor's house between us, we had a child hit on a bicycle. We've had cars doing spinouts. We have cars racing in the same direction on both sides of the road. My dog got hit, and it wasn't my fault. It was a neighbor kid that came over and opened my gate and let the dog in. I said, no, and he came running across the street to see me, the dog, and got hit. So we have, and I have a whole list of other things that have happened on our street. Sooner or later, somebody's going to get killed. We've already had a child hit. We had been fighting for speed bumps for a long time, and I was told, oh no, if somebody hits it and gets in a car accident, the city will be sued. Well, law says that your driver's supposed to be in control of the vehicle at all times, so throw it back at them. I need to put my glasses on. We have racing. It starts, cars start coming down around 4 in the morning, and it goes throughout the day. Yesterday I sat down, I thought, okay, I'm going to sit down and have coffee. I counted 25 cars in less than 15 minutes, and I'm like, okay, this is a residential. And the reason why this is happening basically is poor planning that never got done properly at the very beginning. They were supposed to open Western all the way through to Western on the other side in the Pepper Ridge homes. Is that telling me to be quiet? Darn. And so that didn't happen. You guys didn't get it done. So we get all the traffic from all those homes back there. And then you closed off the street to the college. So we get all the college people coming through Kip's Corner racing. We get all Park Ridge traffic coming through racing. We get everything from the whole back thing, and something has to be done on our street. I did talk with fire several years ago. They said that they could put a breakaway, and that would be fine with them. I understand everybody's got speed bump problems right now. I'd like speed bumps, but the cheapest, the fastest way to solve our problem on Kip's Corner is really a breakaway, and the fire department approved it for me years ago, and that's all I'm asking is something be done on our street, because nothing's been done in 23 years, and we've been fighting this. I've been at this podium before. Nothing's getting done, and we're like, okay, let's do something, and that's what we're asking for. So I could give you a whole list of other things that have happened on our street.
What's your address?
3181 Kip's Corner.
Thank you very much.
All right. So will you guys make contact with me? Are we going to get something done, or are we going to,
Yeah, contact
But
Chad
this has
right
been going
there.
on forever and nothing happens.
Contact Chad and the city manager, and it looks like you're already talking to her. Okay, so
Okay.
sounds like you're in process.
For 23 years.
Hey,
So, thanks.
thank you. Anybody else?
That concludes public comments.
Close public comments.
I'd like to make another comment regarding, in implementing a speed policy, as part of what we've got to figure out as a city is where we put our improvements, our traffic safety measures, traffic calming measures. In that, as you know, we've been working on the feedback signs, but the problem with feedback signs is after a while folks get used to them. There's not the enforcement side, and that's obviously a bigger price tag issue for the city as far as if you're going to spend dollars to actually allow sheriffs to do more traffic enforcement, because that's what's really going to make it stick. Is we can put, for example, again, the feedback signs in many different places, but after a while folks get used to the fact that nothing really is going to happen. They do have an initial impact with folks. I definitely would say that, especially in different streets. People go, oh, whoa, I didn't see that, and they're a little concerned. Where's the cop? But after a couple weeks, or a couple days even, they're not worried about it, and they're speeding along. So even feedback signs have their limitations. Speed humps will have limitations. There will still be folks that we're going to speed over them because they're not concerned about their car and how it happens. But my concern as far as a policy implementation is trying to figure out what type of measures we want to have first prior to putting in physical speed humps. Do we want to try just updating the signage in the area, adding more signs, fixing the striping so it's more visible that you're supposed to be on one side of the road, not in the middle? Does that help any type of traffic calming? Because we're limited in what we can do. Or do we can go to the feedback signs, but we know after a while they're not going to work, or we go to the physical measures. So it's just trying to make sure in this process that we can determine what, on a case-by-case basis, what's appropriate. We don't jump to putting speed humps if we think that some of the other measures are more appropriate. Obviously, just so you're aware that putting the feedback signs are about the same price, maybe a little bit more than putting in each individual speed hump, but they're comparable. It's just one's physically in the street versus the other one's off the side of the road and doing visual notification. So price-wise, they're about the same. It's just trying to decide on, one is certainly a physical thing that costs quite a bit if we're going to remove it. If we determine it wasn't a good idea or had problems, you're talking about removing that, grinding the street and then repaving a certain section to make it back to this condition, versus the feedback sign, we just take the post out and move a different location, which is what we're doing now with our movable signs and trying to get collecting information and trying to impact and find out whether or not those types of signs work. Ultimately, though, when it comes to feedback signs, they do have limitations that folks get used to them. So part of this is the holistic process that I want you to consider in this policy and going forward as we look at measures, is that trying to figure out what steps, what order we do things in, or do we skip to a certain point, or just everyone's a case-by-case basis. So, because again, I want to make sure I know my full arsenal that I can use and that I bring to you and present and get your buy-off on, and it's prudent planning, because we had hopefully a process that allows me to guide me to give you something that you can decide on.
Ted?
Scott, what was the code, the fire code again? I'm just curious.
503.4.1.
Chad, were you aware of that? That one? Okay. I mean, you kind of made it the issue of the humps and the cushions and the bumps and anything else you want to call them, the tables, a moot point if we can't get fired to buy off on them. Bottom line, I mean, as far as a traffic calming measure.
Well, I became aware of the fire code section well after this was prepared and submitted to you to read. Again, I had given the information to fire, and they had been continually evaluating it. They looked at the policy in itself. They didn't object to how we had it written, but they hadn't come back with an actual official opinion yet about whether or not how they would apply their decision-making process. And only recently did, again, through their research and discussions internally, they say, well, here's how we operate, because again, it's a separate agency.
And I understand, and I know where Eric's been, because I've been on those code 3 runs, and it's no fun to hit a speed table or a speed bump or a dip in the road and as you're going code 3. Back to Scott a little bit. As far as traffic calming measures, there are several types out there, and I don't want to get away from what Chad's saying here, but based upon what you're saying, there's almost a kibosh on a hump or a bump or anything else we elevate or drop down the road where you have to slow down. Chokers and restrictors and things like that, are those also?
To where you narrow the roadway?
Well, where you type of a thing, yeah, where you're
You kind of swerving through a road.
Swerving through roads. Anytime, let's put it this way, before we get into long, lengthy discussion, if it's okay with the mayor, is perhaps you two need to get together and figure out what is approved by the fire department before we go through any policy change. Because if we're going to sit up here and then you're going to say, well, per the fire code, blah, 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 and you're the fire marshal and you have the final say, we need to figure out what is we can't do.
Well, like I said, we oppose him, absolutely. But we can't take a blight line approach to say, we won't put him anywhere, we won't agree to him anywhere. For instance, the situation she was just discussing, on a residential street that's not a major thoroughfare. So I'm looking at Pedley, Temescal, 7th, 8th, anything we use on a daily basis that is a major travel route for us. And so everybody understands all of our engines have computers and GPS in them, and that route is selected from the dispatch computer. It's pushed through to the fire engine, including my vehicle, and it constantly changes as we're driving. So the route, potentially, I can't tell you, well, don't put them on Hillside because use that. It's not what it's going to suggest to all your fire engines that are coming. So I just want to make that point clear for a minute. What Marietta did was remove their speed humps they had speed cushions. They removed them because they weren't effective and went with the striping that gives the illusion that you're going on a wandering course, but you could still choose to go straight and drive over the yellow line. However, folks or people will have it, and they follow the person in front of them. So if you're doing this, they're doing that. But it doesn't slow our response. So obviously, we prefer not to have a bump in the road. That's the bottom line. It causes you to slow down. It causes you to speed up, and it takes a little bit of reaction time for a fire engine to do that. That is our concern. Now, to speak about this fire code section, so everyone's clear, Chad came to us about a month ago, maybe 5 weeks ago. This went all the way to Fire Chief John Hawkins, this request and this policy. It came back down yesterday from the county fire marshal with the fire code section attached. It, countywide, we're not fans of them. But as everywhere else, we're willing to work with the community and with the council, with the city, to implement it in places where it's not going to affect us. Is Delmar going to affect us? Probably not. But they need to go through that process, through the policy process, and then we need to look at it along with the sheriffs. Is it going to affect us on Crestview? Probably not. To be honest with you, we don't use Crestview a whole lot. Not a travel route, probably because it's so windy. But we use California a lot, which wouldn't be in this because it's 40 miles an hour. 7th Street, if you did Valley View to California, couldn't say we would be there to support it. We would oppose it. So there are places where we obviously want to look at our response history to that area. Our travel routes we would look at, and the impacts of that particular speed hump. Are we talking one, or are we talking a series of 6 or 8 or 10? So I can't sit here and tell you that we oppose every situation and every circumstance. I can tell you that we support the policy, and we have to look at them on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Well, for me, I guess I think we need to find another way, at least for me. I think that the speed humps really isn't a viable alternative, because in order for it to be effective, we have to put them on Pedley. We have to put them on those various streets. Is there anything else that maybe people, I kind of like Ted's suggestion that maybe you guys get together and maybe figure something out. Does council like that idea?
Just to add a variable, normally in many of the studies I've read, they usually don't put them on any type of bus routes. So if you have kids, so we'll have to find out where the bus routes are for all the schools, which again is your streets you really want to do.
I'm not going to be able to buy anything for Pedley, huh?
Yeah. So, because again, and that's because it's a fixed axle, on that, and kids aren't in seatbelts. If they hit that the wrong speed, they get flown. And so that's why it's not encouraged to put it in any school zone or a bus route.
So maybe we need to find another way.
Temescal too.
Where does council at on this?
I agree with you. I think let them get together and figure out something that they can bring back to us.
Yeah, we can look at maybe isolating the streets that are possible, or eliminating the streets that that are either by our traffic zones, i.e. for the school buses, and or major routes for fire. And then we can say, okay, these are all the roads that are eliminated. Come back and have you look at that and say, based off of what's left, do you feel it's worth still doing the policy? Recognizing what's not there, what's maybe not there, if you take the recommendation to not allow those in those specific areas. And that also helps folks too, to simply say in a policy that if you're in these areas, speed humps are not allowed, so they know not to apply. But we could certainly be happy to come back with that information. I don't think that would even take us very long.
In terms of Kip's Corner, all those council people are dead from 1983, so I think that they're going to give you a hand, and we'll all be watching it. So
I'd make that into a motion.
I'll second that.
We're actually. It's any action.
Oh, okay.
We'll get our heads together and come back with something.
Great.
Another shot at it.
Any other comments? Thank you very much, Chad. Appreciate it. Thank you, Fire Chief. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, staff. We will see you all back here at 7 o'clock.